In 2023, I transitioned from primarily being a collector of things like Pokemon cards to operating as a reselling business within the space. And today I'm going to talk to you about why I did that, if I have any regrets, and how I think that might impact my future engagement with this hobby. With that said, I got started in this space in 2019 buying a pack of Cosmic Eclipse from a store shelf while checking out at the grocery store with my wife. From that pack, I pulled this. A Blastoise and Piplup GX Rainbow Rare. This isn't the exact copy that I pulled from that pack because I ended up actually, if you check out my eBay store linked in the description below, make sure you click all the positive buttons like thumbs ups and comments on your way down there. If you check that out, I actually made my eBay store in 2020, and that's because I sold the first ever card that I pulled a little while after I owned it. And I sold it for a whopping $6.50, if I remember correctly. So I bought this one. It graded a PSA 9. I think it can regrade to a 10. You know how it is. With that said, just as like a commemorative thing. But with that, I was buying packs of cards. I even bought some binders, and these are things that for a couple $100, my wife and I would have to sit down and actually have like a deliberating conversation about like, is this financially responsible? Is this intelligent to do? Could this money be better used elsewhere? Because that's just the stage of life that we were in, right? We were a couple of broke college kids trying to make it work on our own. So after a few years of that, like a big catalyst for me, I did have some items that I sold in 2020 and not an insignificant amount either, I'll say. But after the dust settled from the 2020 and 2021 boom, because they kind of linked together with a small lapse in between, right around the time Black Friday and Christmas shopping was in effect. Funny enough, it's almost like that happened this time around too. But anyway, once the dust settled on those booms and we were in like the stagnant or downturning markets of 2022 into 2023, I realized the gravity of what took place. I realized exactly how many people around me experienced life-changing money because they owned Pokemon cards a year prior to the boom. And it was just incredible. People like Dan Ketchum Collectibles have referenced how he paid off his house primarily using XY Evolution's booster box cases, a product that previously was deemed like uninvestable, unenjoyable, overprinted, and he used that as a massive shovel to start digging away at the total amount of his mortgage. That reduced his household like overhead, the biggest line item on anyone's like household budget, effectively reduced off of Pokemon cards. That's life-changing money. And Dan, I just use as an example because he made his like story public and it's the first one that I could remember when I was coming up with the idea for this video. But there are so many people with similar stories, like people who had bought a Marvel card and sold it and bought their wife a new car. Like this type of shout out to Swami for that one. It's like this type of event occurred over and over and over again as I reflected back on the events of the boom. So I decided to, instead of sell the stuff I don't want anymore, or when I buy a collection selling just the extra cards, I decided why not take the dive and become primarily a reseller with the intention of generating revenue. And so I took the dive. My first year in business, and again, I started like my whole Pokemon adventure with $400 of seed money, and I was able to turn that into about $24,000 in revenue on eBay year one in 2023. Mind you that this was a stagnant or downturning market, and I know I've talked about this before, so I'm not going to dive too deeply into it, but there were plenty of opportunities, and some things that we had working in our favor in that type of market were consistent PSA turnaround times, consistent market pricing. So, the results of a PSA 10 conversion were predictable in terms of like how much you'd be able to sell that card for. And it actually allowed my business to grow year over year twice in a row. So I went from about 24,000 to 54,000 up to over 100,000 this past year in 2025. And over the course of time, like I'll address this, like one common thing that I heard growing up is when you mix a hobby with finances or you start doing your hobby as work, it kind of like taints it or soils your actual level of enjoyment derived from said hobby. And I'm here to just kind of like shed some light on the fact that look around me. Like I've been in the hobby space for 7 years now. I've been operating as a business for 3 years now, and I have more of this type of stuff around me at any given moment than ever before. And as a matter of fact, it's quite the opposite of what you might expect. Previously, when I was a college student, In our household monthly budget, I allocated about $100 to $200 per month on trading card stuff or collectibles. And at the time, that was like a big amount of money. And if I had to do the same thing with my current budget now, because I'm a cheapo, I would also still feel like that was a great amount of money, even though my wife and I aren't broke college kids anymore. With that said, operating as a business, I spend 5 figures a month on Pokemon cards and related items, and I get to be around the types of items that I never even dreamed of owning. As a matter of fact, like something that might make an appearance in a collector's story time video, but like, look at this. This is the production sketch of Itachi before the Uchiha. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, stuff like that is an absolute grail item that people never even, like, I never dreamed that I would have the opportunity to see something like that for sale, let alone be the guy on the winning bid side of things. So operating as a business within this space has allowed me not only to still enjoy collectibles, but it's allowed me to be surrounded by them to a much greater extent than what would have been logistically possible if I was just chipping away $100 a month, $100 a month, $100 a month. I wouldn't have any of the things that you see in this background, let alone like the remainder of my storage and office spaces. So just something to get out of your head if you're like apprehensive about reselling because you think that there's some kind of moral dilemma or you're forsaking your hobby. Quite the opposite. I would argue that I get more enjoyment out of it now because I get to be around more of it. I get to spend more time thinking about it. And with that said too, like, the whole idea of like turning your hobby into work. Okay, let's talk about how that actually looks in real time. Because this year I utilized multiple consignment services in order to get a revenue amount of like a little over 100. I'm finishing my numbers now, but it's looking like top line is going to be something around $101,000 for 2025. Which, this isn't my final form, to quote Frieza. Not nearly. But I feel like I have a greater roadmap of how to be successful now, having gotten that under my belt. But like, let's see, the point I was thinking about was what this space looks like when you turn it into work. Well, to generate $101,000 in revenue, I approximately engaged in 5 hours per week of work. That's it. I would have engaged in that amount of time listening to Pokemon YouTube videos, looking through my collection, thinking about what cards might be undervalued, whether I was operating as a business or not. That's essentially an equivalent amount of time that I would have been spent engaging with this topic or this content. I just happen to be benefiting from it in terms of enjoyment, entertainment, and finances now. Whereas previous to the decision to be a business, I would have only gotten maybe 2 of the 3. So that's another thing to keep in mind if you're considering, taking the leap and starting to resell, as a means of producing some type of income or financial benefit. And I also want to mention that that's not immoral either. Like, card shops have existed, so long as like cards have. And so there's always been people with a financial incentive within the space. It's just more accessible to more people now. You don't have to have a brick and mortar location to generate hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in revenue. All you have to do is have a cell phone and decent access to the internet. So, in terms of barriers to entry, it's like literally never been easier to do this stuff either. And I think that pretty much sums up the synopsis of my thinking here. I think that there is like some level, and I talked in a recent video about like haters, like you're never going to get ahead by being a hater. Funny enough, there was like I think a comment on that video that was kind of like hatery, but what the deal is like, there's some core group of people out there, and I don't know if it's just like related to a specific way of thinking or some like personal beliefs or whatever, but there is a way of thinking where a true collector is someone who never trades money for cardboard. And I get it, and you're allowed to think that way, and you're allowed to do things that way as well, but I would just make the argument that it's not optimal. And I would also make a strong case for the fact that like reselling cards is not unethical either, because there's an end consumer at the end of every card's lifespan, and the end consumer, even though you are a true collector, you might still not be your end consumer for the items that you possess. Because again, if you're just trading your income for cardboard with a monthly budget, depending on what your financial situation looks like depending on how much, like what types of securities you have in place in your personal life, you never know when you're going to have to let your collection go because something bigger popped up. And again, like I would even make the connection that like operating as a business, there's some amount of insulation between that happening to me like with and without a business. Anyway, in terms of just like financial security. So I'll make a video soon about how exactly Pokemon has changed my life for my family, and hopefully that pairs pretty well with this one. So with that said, thank you all for watching. Hope to see you on the next one.